Fire Emblem Conquest was one of 3 Fates games, and I remember when it came out. It was the first one I played, and I basically binged it and the other Fates games for weeks straight. For whatever reason though, these games didn't stick with me much, and I didn't play them much after their initial release. Recently though, I played a run of Conquest on stream, so with it fresh in my mind, let's answer the questions, how good is Conquest, and is the game right for you? To start with, I'm gonna address the elephant in the room, which is Conquest's writing. If you've heard enough about Conquest's story, I totally understand, and there's a timestamp in the description if you want to just jump to the next section. Writing is by far the most criticized aspect of Conquest, with many viewing it as one of the worst stories in the series. Unfortunately, I am inclined to agree, though I wouldn't go so far as to say the writing is bad across the board. The story follows our main character, Corrin, as they aim to help their country of Nor conquer their rival nation of Hoshido, so that they can have their secretly evil dad sit on a magic throne that will reveal his true form, allowing them to end the conflict between the two nations once and for all. If that sounds a little silly, it's because it is. This scenario also isn't super well executed. The story starts fairly strong with Corrin choosing their adopted family in Nor over their blood relatives in Hoshido, but after that, we spend 9 or 10 chapters in the following pattern. The King of Nor orders us to do something bad. We do it, we get sad about it, and we learn that sacrifices have to be made in war. This is a fine pattern the first couple times, but it's astonishing how often the game goes to this well without presenting something more interesting. The pacing is also rough at times because Conquest loves to do some really long cutscenes. There were multiple occasions where I found myself saying, this was a really good scene, but it should have ended like 3 minutes ago. All of this is to say that the story wasn't quite for me. The premise was a little too silly, and I didn't think most of the cast developed in a very interesting way for most of the story. However, I wouldn't go so far as to say that the writing is bad on the whole. The prose is mostly fine to good throughout the game, and the cast is very likable. Where the writing does get a chance to shine is in the supports, and these vary wildly in quality, but I give Conquest a bit of a break on that since they had to write about 1 million support conversations. And there are some real gems in here. Soleil's support with Laszlo is one of my favorites in the series. I love the way that it portrayed a positive, loving relationship between an LGBT daughter and her father. Selena and Laszlo also had a fun support where she calls him out on his unwanted flirting. Laszlo just has good supports, to be honest. The one where Keaton keeps bringing him giant bugs is also peak comedy. But even outside of Laszlo, there are some pretty good support conversations to be found in Fates. There are a fair amount of rough supports too, to be fair. Silas and Camilla feel like they go from friendly to married at the snap of your fingers, and any S support for Elise is uncomfortable. But overall, I enjoyed the supports in Fates. The good supports stick out in my mind more than the bad ones. I'm also going to defend Corrin a little bit. Corrin is often thought of as one of the worst protagonists, but honestly, I found Corrin mostly likable. What Corrin really suffers from is that the writing around them is not very good all the time. Take the Kitsune chapter, for example. In this chapter, Corrin leads her army up a mountain and runs into a tribe of fox people who attack her. Corrin's army wipes out the entire tribe, and naturally this is a sad moment, and it seems like Corrin is going to reflect on their decision and grow from it. But the problem is Corrin didn't really make a decision here. Prior to going up the mountain, Corrin is presented 2 choices: rush into thousands of Hoshidan troops, or go through the mountain and chance encountering the Fox tribe. The mountain is presented as the only non-suicidal option, so they take it. Then, when Corrin is lamenting their decision to go up the mountain, other characters correctly point out that it wasn't really a choice. There's really nothing for Corrin to learn from this because the writing didn't give them an opportunity to make a decision, so the only lesson to take away from this is that sometimes sacrifices have to be made in war. But this is the same lesson that Corrin has learned several times over the last handful of chapters, so it doesn't really hit in an interesting way. But it's important to note that this problem isn't really Corrin's fault. We could stick another lord in the game and the same problem would exist. So I think people are a little too hard on Corrin. Corrin, to me, largely feels how they should. They're unsure of their decision to join Nor instead of their birth family, and they're naive because they never saw the outside world for most of their life. Corrin is fine. It's the scenarios that don't give Corrin interesting opportunities to develop. With better writing surrounding them, I bet Corrin would be a much better liked character. Basically, to me, story bad, Corrin fine. So that's the writing out of the way. Let's move on to a more positive subject: the gameplay. Gameplay is the thing Conquest is most known for, and it can be a little overwhelming at first because there's a lot to take in. Let's start with unit customization because it's a big deal in this game. Units have 6 skill slots to consider, and if you want to get the most out of your units, you'll want to fill all 6 of those with good skills. Good stats aren't always enough to win the day on the harder maps, so you're going to want to fill those slots with the most impactful skills you can manage. You get skills by leveling up a unit in a particular class, so sometimes units need to spend time in several different classes to get all the skills you want. For example, I wanted my Soleil to be great for killing ninjas, so I sent her into Bow Knight for a few levels, basically just so she could learn the Shuriken Breaker skill. Similarly, Laszlo had to go through 3 different classes in my playthrough because I wanted him to learn a bunch of rally skills and they all came from different classes. So a lot of units are going to spend time in a bunch of different classes, and that brings us to the reclassing system. Units can use a variety of reclassing items to change class. By default, each character has 2 classes they can reclass into, but they can add more reclass options by supporting other units. A unit can have a Romantic S support and a Platonic A+ support, and upon completing each one, they earn 1 more reclass option from their support partner. Supporting Silas with Kaze, for example, unlocks the Ninja class for Silas. So if you want to really optimize your units in Fates, you need to plan out your supports so that everyone can get into the classes you want and get the skills that you want them to have. This also adds some urgency to building supports. I wanted Effie and Sniper before mid-game ninja maps, so it was important for me to really focus on building her support with Mozu so that I could have her in the right class in time. If you have multiple units that want to support the same character, you may have to decide which one is the priority and which one can hold off and get their reclass a little bit later. So between all of these systems, Conquest is a game that really rewards planning, especially on subsequent playthroughs. If you think about what skills are available and what maps are challenging, you can often find a clever build that will help you with it. A good example of this from my run was partway through the game, there's a map loaded with Kitsune that can be a bit of a pain if you haven't planned for it. My solution was to get Silas' soul from the hero class and then move him to ninja so that he could take all the Kitsune out with the Hunter's Dagger, which dealt effective damage, while healing via soul procs. This basically let him solo the entire map, and it was so satisfying to watch that plan come together. There are all sorts of builds that you can do, and they'll solve different problems in different maps. So if you enjoy long-term planning, resource management, and making builds for units, Conquest is going to be an amazing video game for you. The only drawback to these systems is that to really take advantage of them, you need a fair amount of game knowledge. On your first playthrough, when you don't know what the upcoming challenges are or what skills come from which class, it can be difficult to make the long-term plans that you can in later playthroughs when you do have that information. But if you're like me, after beating the game, you'll be dying to do it again to test your knowledge against the game's harder difficulties. Now, in the moment-to-moment gameplay, the stand-up feature in Conquest is pair-up, which allows your units to fight together. In a pair-up, one unit is the active unit while the other one is the backup. The backup unit provides a buff to their pair-up partner based on their class. For example, ninjas provide speed and a point of move to their partner. The backup unit can't be attacked, but they also can't take any actions, so pairing up has a lot of utility. You can use it to help your unit hit a stat benchmark, or to build a support, or to protect a unit that's in danger, or to just help a low mobility unit get around by pairing them to a more mobile unit. So on the surface, it seems like you might want to be paired up all the time, but there are a few important trade-offs. First, when units aren't paired up, they can dual attack. A dual attack triggers when a unit who isn't paired up attacks with an ally next to them. When you do this, the ally jumps into attack as well, dealing half their usual damage. So there's a neat push and pull where sometimes you want to be paired up for the extra stats, while other times you want to be unpaired so that you can get dual attacks and have more actions per turn. The real kicker to the pair up and dual attack system is that enemies use it too. So when you're calculating things like whether a unit will survive an attack, you need to factor in possible dual attacks from enemies. Between enemy pair-ups and enemies having skills just like you do, Conquest can feel a bit overwhelming at first. There's lots of factors to consider when looking at how much damage an enemy unit is going to do. Of course, there's the usual damage formula, but then you need to check if there are any relevant skills or possible dual attacks. It just takes a little getting used to. But by the end of the game, I felt this was just the right amount of complexity. There's lots to think about, but usually it's a manageable amount of variables. If you find other Fire Emblem games a little too simple, Conquest could be a great game for you to play, but if you find other Fire Emblem games to be complex enough, you might not appreciate all of the extra variables on offer here. So Conquest has all these neat mechanics, but it would all be for naught if the game didn't offer interesting scenarios to use these mechanics to solve. Fortunately, the map design in Conquest is really good. Let's look at a few of the standout maps to see what I mean. The piece de resistance for me is Chapter 10, which is by far the best defense map in the series. It's easy to get overwhelmed if you just sit on the defense point, so you're instead encouraged to push out and deal with enemies before they can get too close to the objective. And then, just when you think things are starting to calm down and you've got things under control, Takumi uses his Dragon Vein to dry up the water and add even more ways for enemies to approach. Plus, there's a pair of villages to grab as well that encourages you to push out even just a little bit further. It's a tricky map that pulls you in a lot of different directions on your first playthrough, and on subsequent playthroughs once you've mastered that part of the map, you can challenge yourself to go try to kill Takumi. Another map that I really enjoyed was Ophelia's Paralog. This map has 4 different villages for you to visit, each of which has a nice reward ranging from unique tomes to a spirit dust for your favorite mage. The villages are in 4 separate locations on the map, and enemies start moving towards them right away, so you need to split up your army to go grab them all. This is also one of my favorite route maps in the series because there's a legitimate time pressure. You don't spend a bunch of time picking off the last couple stragglers at the end of the map, instead the enemies pressure you, and you need to be proactive if you want to get all of the villages and avoid being overwhelmed by the aggressive enemies. Unlike many route maps in the series, this one is fast-paced the entire time. Conquest maps are also complicated by the skill builds on enemies. Skills like counter magic can force you to use physical damage on a foe if you can't one-shot them, and sometimes an enemy will be loaded with skills that trigger when they initiate an attack. So you want to try to work around them by killing them on player phase so that they never get to initiate an attack. Enemy skills will often dictate how you approach a map or a group of enemies, and they can make the obvious approach to some maps less attractive. Though Conquest mostly shines in the map department, it does do a few things I don't like. A big one is certain staves, like Enfeeble or Freeze, that debuff a unit from long range. In most maps, these staves are an interesting complication. They force you to really consider moving a unit somewhere if they can't afford to be frozen there for a turn or debuffed on enemy phase. However, there are a few occasions where these staves exist in locations where there's no time pressure on the map. For example, on this map at the theater, there's an Enfeeble staff that nerfs your stats for 4 turns, but there's no time pressure at all on hard mode. So there's nothing to stop you from just eating a few staff uses to break the Enfeeble, and then just waiting out the stat penalty. Something like a thief pressuring the chests on the map would have encouraged you to play more aggressively into the staff user, instead of just waiting it out. For the most part though, Conquest maps and enemy skills do a great job of encouraging you to play aggressively. This game feels very action-packed, and there's new challenges continually being thrown your way. I think it's some of the best map design in the series. So, overall, the gameplay of Conquest is excellent. If you enjoy building units, challenging and fast-paced maps, and a game that really rewards long-term planning, Conquest is a perfect fit for you. And honestly, even if all of that just sounds okay to you, give Conquest a try anyway. It's really well done, and I think it's a must-play for anyone that loves Fire Emblem gameplay. If you're more into the Fire Emblem games for the story, Conquest might be worthy of a skip. But even then, think about checking out some of the supports online and see how you feel about them. The story wasn't for me, but there are a lot of strong points in the cast, and if you like them like I did, there might be something for you here in the supports. All in all, I'm coming away from Conquest with a better impression of it than I had going in. Enough that in my personal ranking of games, it's moving up to the top of pretty good. The only thing keeping it out of lovely, lovely, lovely is that I care about the story in these games a lot, and Conquest just doesn't quite do it for me in that respect. The gameplay is chef's kiss though, and you should definitely give it a chance. But what do you think of Conquest? Is it better or worse than I think? Let me know in the comments, or consider joining the community Discord linked in the video description if you want to talk Fire Emblem. Lastly, if you liked the video and you want to see more content like it, consider hitting the like or subscribe button so that you never miss an upload, and have yourself an awesome week.